Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Who have you met that you think are irredeemable and truly evil? A little not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I met someone whose goal in life was to infect as many people as possible with their STD. I'm frankly hoping they were bullshitting to be edgy. I knew a kid in school who was so evil that the gang members at school reportedly beat his ass for picking on the disabled kids. He went crying to the teachers, who claimed they saw nothing. Anyway, last I heard, he's in federal prison for who knows what. The kid in middle school came armed and intended to kill several individuals. For whatever random reason, he told me specifically I was not his friend to not come to school the next day because he was going to kill several people. I told my teacher, then spent the rest of the day behind closed doors and interviews with the police. They let him come to school, then caught him coming off the bus with a backpack with guns and ammo. Never saw him again, but I was told he had threatened to kill me. That's been decades, but I still consider the fact that I might have to deal with him someday. Hopefully he's died of fentanyl or jail or something and rid the world of his evil. I grew up with a guy who was always mentally unstable. He ended up throwing his newborn against a wall because she wouldn't stop crying. Poor little thing died from her injuries. He's in prison, where he belongs. This one guy I grew up with committed countless downright cruel and vindictive acts from kindergarten to age 18. I hadn't seen him since high school. 14 years later, I read he was arrested after leading police on a high-speed chase through backcountry roads and crashing with a 2- and 4-year-old in the vehicle. Every single other bully or mean person I remember growing up with, I either came to see the totality of their character by the end of high school or as adults. But not this guy. One of my dad's best friends. It turns out he's a pedophile and has been R-ing his stepdaughter since she was about 10 until she left home at 18. It only came out a few years ago, and he was in prison last I knew. Growing up, he always seemed nice enough, but he was my dad's best friend, so I assumed he was a nice guy, but apparently my dad's a bad judge of character. She's about my age, early 30s, and we spent a whole lot of time together as kids. And you never would have known. She was always happy. We would hang out together just like any pair of kids growing up, and she never mentioned anything that made me question. She's grown into a remarkably well-adjusted woman. She's married, has kids, has a house, and has a dog. We haven't really spoken since I left the country about a decade ago, but from chats with the family about her and her siblings, she's doing great. Mom's sister. Manipulated my grieving grandma after my grandpa died, married a guy out of prison who forced my cousin to commit armed robbery, which made him ineligible to enlist in the Navy, told everyone my mom beat the shit out of her, grabbed her arm, started pulling shit in the hospital room minutes after my grandma died, shoved my uncle and claimed he assaulted her and keeps insisting that she deserved my grandma's money, even though no one in the family claims her anymore, not even her own kids. My late aunt. My mother told me stories about her narcissistic tendencies from when they were children. As a child, my grandmother would handle knit clothes for all her children, including a dress for this aunt. Days after presenting it to her, my grandmother asked her why she hadn't worn the dress. Her answer was, "I threw it into the boiler fire because I didn't need it." As she grew up, she would proceed to steal money from my grandparents, causing major discourse between them. And after my grandfather passed away, she tried to rope my mother into framing my grandmother for something along the lines of fraud or theft. This was years ago. Details are fuzzy. My mother went into a full-blown tirade about how cold-hearted she was for putting their parents through hell for so many years. As a response, my aunt chose to completely shun anyone related to my mother, just outright ignored my mother and siblings for the rest of her years, all because she couldn't stand being called out on her bullshit. Eventually, all my aunts and uncles caught wind of what happened, and from that day onward, no one put up with her atrocious behavior. Even her own children couldn't convince her to get help. She remained resolute in pitting my family as enemies until her final breath. But despite all the disrespect, my mother still harbored love for her and sobbed uncontrollably when she died. She may mourn, but I do not. I have no sympathy for assholes who harm the people who love them just to stroke their egos. My brother murdered a fellow homeless person in cold blood for over $20 and somehow got a plea deal for 6 years. I'll never speak to him again and talk shit about him every chance I get, including to his face once he's out. He's been horrifically abusive since childhood in every way, has had every chance to rehabilitate, and refuses. That, to me, is pure evil. Knowing your issues hurt other people physically, sexually, and emotionally, and flat out refusing to do anything about them. One of my neighbors when I was a kid, she used to come down to my house every once in a while and hang out, but you could just tell by looking at her that she didn't have any feelings. She was faking all her emotions. She ended up stabbing a homeless guy to death in the street for no reason at all. I don't think she was any older than 20. She's in prison for the rest of her life now. The ER doctor kept gossiping how I was drug-seeking to all the nurses when I got into a car accident and couldn't walk. Through tears, I told him I just wanted to know what was wrong and I didn't care about the pain medication. I was in immense pain, but he sent me home with Tylenol and ignored me. He told me to my face that I was lying about everything because a car accident couldn't cause the chronic pain and weakness I was dealing with. It took my psychiatrist writing a letter for an emergency MRI for doctors to finally take me seriously. Without my psychiatrist, I might not be here today, because he was the only one who believed me when I told him how intense the pain was. I pray that doctor gets the karma he deserves from all the people he refused to help. A guy who began SAing me when I was 12. I've been saved by different people throughout my life, but this one particular person is someone I truly believe to be an evil, sadistic psychopath and someone who has no intention of ever changing. Trigger warning, SA. He was only 16 at the time, but I truly enjoyed the suffering he was causing me. He made sure to make it physically and or emotionally painful, enjoyed making threats, using violence and pulling out weapons, and got pissed off and violent if I began disassociating because he wanted me to be present and active in my suffering. He then got off on how I eventually became complicit and did as I was told, as he felt he'd successfully mentally broken me, and then he got further enjoyment from sharing me with his friends. I do not know who they are, to show off the extent of his ability to dominate and control me. I bumped into him again as an adult at a funeral, and he had no problem coming up to me, sitting down next to me, and talking to me like an old friend surrounded by our friends and family, and all while starting to rub my leg under the table. Once again, you could tell he truly just enjoyed the sense of power and control he had over me, even after 10 or 15 years. He had literally no fear or hesitation to do that in public. I actually feel he is incapable of even feeling those emotions. All he has is rage and a desire for power. He's a successful finance guy now, with a wife and children. People admire him and find him charming, and I feel tremendous guilt over never having tried to press charges because I imagine he would have had to have done this to other people. He enjoyed it too much. A girl I knew took advantage of everyone around her, especially really kind and generous people. I quickly pushed her away after she stole jewelry from me and then lied about it. She then latched on to a friend of mine and lived rent-free in his apartment. I warned him that she was bad news, but he was too kind and felt sorry for her. All the while, she was secretly pawning his belongings. Anyway, she stinks, and it would be the surprise of a lifetime if I found out that she changed her ways. My dad is evil. He is currently serving 85 plus years for CSA in a prison where he's the leader of a cult that believes he's the emissary of God. He was diagnosed with ASPD. He's a legitimate sociopath and frequently sends letters to family members scrawled in his blood and some containing other body fluids. I don't know why they continue to let him send mail. When I was a kid, He enjoyed setting cats on fire or tying their tails together and throwing them over a clothesline to watch them scratch each other to death. He tried to force me to torture animals with him, which I always refused, but I saw him do some things I will never forget. He talked about how easy it would be to get away with multiple murders all the time and discussed an escape plan if it ever came to that. He tried to murder the whole family on multiple occasions, individually and all together, but was afraid of getting caught for it, so he staged a lot of incidents that could have potentially killed us. Gas leaks, brake fluid draining, accidents in the shop, etc. The worst part was that he was charismatic and used religion to control everyone around him, so everyone was very sympathetic to poor, dear dad who just wanted to keep his family safe. He was very good at manipulating weak minds and was always an elder in every church we were a part of. He gained a large following of impressionable idiots everywhere we went to follow his every word. I clashed with him young because I was precocious and tough, so his merciless daily beatings started to not have the psychological effect he thought they should. I was too calm, collected, and logical, and he didn't like it. He would justify anything based on his belief that if a believer receives a word from God, we aren't allowed to question it. When I first started dating my wife, my dad hated her because she's Catholic, so he told me that God came to him in a vision and told him that she would drag me to hell. I told him that was bullshit, and he replied that we aren't allowed to question the word of a believer. I told him that God came to me in a vision and told me that he was full of shit and to not listen to him. He was very confused about where to go from there. I married her, and he went away for the rest of his life. Sounds like your dad is right where he belongs, because I don't think that's a person that should be in society, so sorry. My brother-in-law. We first met about 30 years ago and thought he was an asshole. 10 to 15 years later, find out he was such a scumbag, he was basically waiting for his parents to die, both the nicest, hardest working people you'd ever meet, just so he could collect their small amount of savings and insurance money. And this applies to his second wife as well. The first one's a sweetheart. They could slide under a gas truck and die. Yeah, like that. My brother's girlfriend's abusive ex kicked in their door, fractured my brother's skull, eye socket, and jaw, and put him on a ventilator. My brother ended up with brain damage. Physically, it caused him to develop seizures and mobility issues. It also left him with the intellectual capacity of an 8 to 10-year-old. He couldn't read or write anymore, and his memory was so impaired that he forgot our mom was dead. It was completely life-altering for him and those of us close to him. 5 months later, my brother slipped down some stairs, hit his head again, and died instantly. We knew it was almost certainly because of the previous injury, but they couldn't prove it. They took him to court for the assault, though. My sister and I were there for the whole case, and we watched him twist things and try to drag my brother's name through the mud. He kept trying to stare us down and would make snide comments and rude jokes loud enough to hear when we'd all be in the lobby while court was recessed. He didn't think he'd get convicted. He was making eye contact, laughing and joking with his people while the jury deliberated. He knew he'd taken the closest thing we had to a parent from us and thought it was funny. Pure evil, pure stupid too, because when the jury came back 3 hours later, they convicted him on all counts. I spoke at his sentencing last month, and the judge gave him 11.5 years. I hope he dies in prison, because I 100% believe that he'll hurt more people when he gets out. I've lived in a lot of places, but there's only been one person I've ever met that I thought was just wrong. It was just the horrible irony of this world that she happened to live on the same street as a child in one of the most vulnerable situations I've ever come across. The girl, who I genuinely believed had some kind of psychopathy, was a 5th grade girl who lived on my street. Normal family, parents a little strict. She got grounded if she got a C-, but her little brother was completely normal, if openly wary, maybe even scared of his older sister. She did things that were frankly bizarre for a girl her age. She liked setting people's dogs loose by opening their gates in the hopes the dog would get run over. Set someone's parakeet loose once, teamed up with another kid, got the other kid's dog riled up, then went up to another kid that was walking their dog and unleashed the riled up dog so they attacked the leashed dog. Other kids said they'd told them to show up because there were going to be a dog fight, but they thought she was bullshitting. Liking about setting up a dog fight was just the kind of weird thing she would do. The big one, though, is one I was a little too young to understand. I was a very extroverted kid, and I knew there was one kid on the block who never came out to play. I'd knock on the door to ask if they wanted to come out and play, and the mom, a gentle and soft-spoken lady, would say her child wasn't feeling very well. Me and the other kids kept trying, but eventually we learned to let it go. One day I came home from school, and the psycho girl was beaming, grinning from ear to ear, hopping with excitement to tell me something. I'll never forget the look of glee on her giant, wide eyes as she explained that she had managed to befriend that kid and found out the kid was a hermaphrodite. I had no idea what this meant, and by her reaction, I could tell she was counting on that. She proceeded to excitedly tell me how they had girl and boy parts, complete with waggling finger gestures, and I can still remember her voice as she broke into laughter and started saying, "Hermie, they should call Hermie." I remember something about, so what is it, a she, a he, and it? It's a shit. At this point, I was long sick of this kid, and the weird thing is, looking back, the idea of someone having both girl and boy parts wasn't even registering. All I could focus on was why this chick was so excited about this and gleeful. She was downright manic. 20 years later, and I can still remember by the way her voice kind of cracked when she was yelling Hermie. I just sort of whatevered out of the conversation and went to my friend's house. It was years later, when I was a bit older, that I understood what had happened. Chances are she wasn't lying. Kids that age generally don't know what a hermaphrodite is or an intersex person, and it would explain why the mom was so reticent to let her child out to play. It's one of those moments I think back on as the exact worst thing that happened at the exact worst time. When that poor kid finally tried going out to play, of all the kids in the neighborhood, it was their unbelievably bad luck that they stumbled across probably the only genuine psychopath I've ever known in my life. I keep thinking about that poor kid finally going out on a limb and going outside, only to run smack dab into probably the worst example of a kid I've ever known. I've never met an intersex person before or since. I've never met a genuine psychopath before or since. What are the odds that those two should cross paths? Why couldn't that poor kid have come across literally anyone else on the street? I never saw that poor kid again. I moved away shortly after. Last I heard of the psycho girl, she had a restraining order against her by one of the neighbors. I had a childhood friend growing up. Once we graduated high school, I went my way, but he kept in touch. All through high school, he would date 14 to 16-year-old girls, and I thought nothing of it. Fast forward to him and me being 20, and he's still doing it. I started making up excuses to not do anything with him. Then once I was 21, he asked me to date his 14-year-old girlfriend's mother so she'd be occupied. I said no, and later that weekend, my band was playing a gig, and there he, the girl, and the mother were sitting next to our band's table. That night was the last time I saw him until I was in my mid-40s. I'm supporting a friend and his family and attending a football game for the team he coached that was competing for a state title. My friend's wife nudges me and points out this old guy who's kissing one of the flag girls in the band. I recognize him. I immediately tell my current friend's mother, who was on the school board for that town, and she goes and gets the dad, who busts that up. The dude is evil, because every girl I have met that he slept with has the worst mental health, and I recognize it as a side effect of the constant gaslighting and manipulation he put them through. I was at Walmart and was grabbing some stuff to make spaghetti. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. No one was in the aisle in front of me, so I turned, and a lady was walking with her kid, who was maybe 7 or 8. I'm nearly 6 foot tall, big guy who wasn't scared of much. I don't know what to call it, aura? This kid was putting the shite out of me. I'm convinced this kid was either the next major serial killer or actually possessed by a demon. I left immediately. I left the store. I left the basket by the entrance as I left, and I went to the other grocery store in town. I've not seen him since, but I would 100% know it if he walked near me again. I met murderers, gang members, drug dealers, HOA presidents, and not one of them made me feel that way. I hope I never see him again.